This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis with an infuriated cat locked out of my office. The download is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. This week's stories include YouTube podcast eligibility might be the way to save the Emmys' ever-shrinking talk category, 2 surprising facts about platform consumption in 2025, Chartable is finally going away for good, and Spotify launches a messaging feature in a bid to become more social. Let's get started. Awards columnist Michael Schneider has an op-ed highlighting how chat podcasts have effectively usurped traditional broadcast TV shows in ubiquity, specifically talk shows. Clips of Conan O'Brien interviewing guests in a podcast studio perform as well, if not better, online than legacy TV talk shows he left behind. Taylor Swift announced her new album on a sports podcast. A quote from the article, quote, "This year, just 13 talk shows were submitted to the Emmys, which is why we only had 3 nominees. Nominations are based on the number of submissions received in a category. If there are between 8 and 19 entrants, the Academy divides the number of submissions by 4 and rounds to the nearest whole number. And that number will continue to shrink as The Late Show has 1 more year of eligibility left before it goes away. Even hosts like Seth Meyers and Jimmy Kimmel are realistic that the age of the traditional network talker is ending, which is why we need to prepare for the evolution." End quote. While the Golden Globes adding a podcast-exclusive category is nice, Schneider argues the way to save talk show categories is to acknowledge where modern talk shows live: TV and video podcasting. In this week's Sounds Profitable newsletter, Tom Webster goes more into detail over a favorite slide of the Podcast Landscape 2025 data he teased at Podcast Movement. The slide focuses on American respondents 18 plus using Spotify or YouTube and how much of their consumption was watching, not listening, to video podcasts. Only a slight majority of YouTube podcast consumers actually watch more than half of their podcasts, with only 34% saying they watch more than 75% of their YouTube podcasts as video, which means just under half of YouTube podcast consumers primarily listen, even if it's a video podcast. This data supports Webster's theory that getting a podcast on YouTube isn't necessarily about being on video, it's that YouTube is a really good app for podcast consumption, full stop. There's solid community, search, discovery, and engagement all rolled into an easy-to-use app that's installed on just about every phone in the United States. A quote from the article, quote, "That might have surprised you, but I've seen plenty of data over the years about background and minimized YouTube audio consumption, and this just confirms the vitality of audio-first content. The Spotify number, however, did surprise me. The Spotify numbers show that despite expectations and muscle memory of Spotify having historically been an audio-only app, video consumption has grown to the point where 31% of respondents spend at least 50% of their podcast consumption time on Spotify watching video. A video component is important for a podcast on a video platform, but if the audio doesn't work in a vacuum, the podcast won't make sense to audiences who still consume video podcasts technically, but mostly listen." This one's short, but an important one. While it's been public knowledge for quite some time that Megaphone customers will lose access to Chartable eventually, there's now a concrete date. According to Pod News reporting, an email has gone out to Megaphone customers detailing Chartable will fully sunset on December 8th of this year. It also says where users can go to start using links in Megaphone, Spotify's in-house answer to Chartable Smart Links. As of December 8th, all existing Chartable Smart Links will stop working. A new chat feature in Spotify allows one-on-one messaging with other users in the app, or somebody the user has previously shared content with exists, such as being in a collaborative playlist, joining a jam session, or accounts that are in a family or duo plan alongside your account. A quote from the article, quote, "Outside of Spotify, if someone sends a Spotify link to you on platforms like Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, or TikTok, basically anywhere that's not Spotify, You can tap on it and approve the request to chat. Alternatively, you can send an invite link to someone in your contacts. The company has said that users should continue sharing content outside of Spotify. The new messaging feature is more meant to be a complement to that, end quote. While, as the quote says, this messaging is intended to complement collaborative playlist building and music discussion, having the ability for more communication and fan engagement on one of the biggest podcast consumption apps has to be a net positive for podcasting. Finally, it's time for quick hits. These are articles I've covered throughout the week that didn't make the cut for full story coverage, but I still argue are worth including in your weekend reading. Here's what I got for you this week. First up, something a little self-indulgent. I was a busy bee at Podcast Network last week and have a couple of interviews to share with you. First, I spoke to journalist and Casuals host Katie Nolan, talking about her experience joining the world of podcasting and running a podcast for people who might be into sports but find it intimidating. And then I also have an interview with Ozen.fm co-founder Rodrigo Tigre talking about his motivations for starting the company and bridging tech gaps in underserved podcast markets. Podstock has announced a feature called Episode 360 that consolidates engagement statistics from short-form video clips back to the parent episode of the podcast they were clipped from. Acast has launched Ads Academy, a platform that currently has 2 free courses teaching both the basics, 101, and intermediary, 102, strategies of podcast advertising. And finally, Magellan AI and Australian Radio Network have published the first Australian quarterly benchmark. This one covers Q2 of 2025. That was the download brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I went through today's stories fast, but you can find them all with a handy-dandy link in the show notes that takes you to the download section of soundsprofitable.com. Or if you want to go there yourself, you can subscribe to the newsletter while you're there. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. And as always, I extend a special thanks to you and my phone for going off on the final take. A special thanks to you, seriously, for sticking with me as I brought you the top stories you might have missed this week in the business of podcasting. Robot?
Download complete.